Picture a plant that's been sitting in your garden for 15 years. It looks the same every season. No flowers, just leaves. Then one spring, it sends up a bloom spike taller than your house, opens thousands of flowers over a few weeks, sets seed, and dies. And you'd be wrong to feel sad about it, because that plant just did exactly what it was built to do. There are 10 plants that follow this exact pattern, and the biology of why they do it will completely change how you think about plant reproduction. Number 1, agave, century plant. The agave sits in dry yards across the southern US, and people write it off as a slow grower, maybe even a struggling one. It's not struggling. Every year, it pulls carbon from the air and locks it into those thick leaves. Not to get taller, but to stockpile fuel for a reproductive event it won't attempt for another decade. When the math finally works out, the plant redirects all of that stored carbohydrate into a bloom spike that can hit 20 to 30 feet in just a few weeks. The leaves visibly shrink as the stalk rises, because the plant is burning its own tissue to build it. After flowering and setting thousands of seeds, the agave dies. Not from disease. The reserves are simply gone. Before that happens, though, it pushes out small clonal offsets called pups around its base. So even if the seeds fail, the genetic line continues. Number 2, Puya Raimondi. There's a Puya Raimondi growing in the Andes right now that sprouted before your grandparents were born, and it still hasn't flowered. The juvenile phase runs 80 to 100 years, and during that entire time, the plant just builds a dense rosette of spine-tipped leaves and accumulates energy. Slow and invisible, like compound interest. What the data shows is that the length of the weight correlates directly with the scale of the bloom. When it finally fires, the spike hits around 30 feet and carries thousands of flowers, one of the largest inflorescences of any plant on Earth, producing millions of seeds before the parent dies. It's also critically endangered. Some of the individual plants alive today may be the last ones to ever complete that full cycle. Number 3, Talipot palm. Most palms flower every year without any fuss. Corypha umbraculaifera spends 30 to 80 years doing the same thing before it does something completely different. And when it finally commits, the bloom structure stretches up to 26 feet and holds millions of individual flowers. The entire crown converts into a reproductive structure, pulling every gram of stored starch from the trunk's soft interior. That's where the structural biology gets interesting. The talipot can't add diameter the way a hardwood does, so all its reserves sit in that central core. Once those reserves drain into the bloom, the trunk loses its support and collapses, sometimes taking neighboring trees down with it and opening a light gap directly where the seeds need to germinate. Number 4, bamboo. Walk into a bamboo forest where every single plant, across hundreds of acres, is flowering at the same time, and your first instinct is that something's wrong. Nothing's wrong. This is the plan. Certain bamboo species carry an internal clock that locks in at germination and runs independent of geography, climate, or anything else. Take a cutting from a stand in Japan, grow it in Brazil, and decades later, both plants flower the same year. The reason for the synchrony is predator satiation. When every plant seeds at once, rats, birds, and insects can't eat it all. Surplus seeds survive. Philostachys bambusoides runs a 120-year cycle, consistent enough that botanists predict future events from historical records. Number 5, banana plant. You've eaten the product of a monocarpic plant hundreds of times without knowing it. Musa, the banana, sends up one pseudostem, which isn't woody tissue at all, but tightly packed leaf bases. Flowers once, fruits once, and then that stem is finished. Done. But the underground corm keeps pushing out new shoots, so the genetic individual survives even as each stem above ground spends itself completely. Commercial Cavendish bananas are sterile triploids, which means no viable seeds, and every plant in global production traces back to clones from that same corm lineage. That's why a single fungal strain like Panama disease can threaten the entire supply chain at once. Number 6, bromeliads. If you own a bromeliad and it just flowered, you didn't kill it. The decline you're watching was scheduled from the start. Most bromeliad species are monocarpic at the rosette level, meaning that individual rosette blooms once and dies, but not before pushing out clonal offsets called pups around its base. Those pups will eventually do the same thing. The flowering trigger is ethylene gas, which is why setting a ripening apple inside the plant's leaf cup can force it to bloom. Once the ethylene signal lands, the process can't be reversed. In native habitats, those leaf cups collect rainwater and host whole communities of frogs and insects. So when the parent rosette dies, that microhabitat collapses until the pups establish new cups nearby. Number 7, Aeonium. Aeoniums are popular in dry gardens because they look architectural and need almost no water. But many species in this genus are monocarpic, and that rosette sitting on your windowsill for 3 years might be building toward a bloom it won't survive. When the flower spike emerges from the center, the rosette stops making new leaves and starts pulling carbon, nitrogen, and water back from the outer ones. Those leaves yellow and drop, not from neglect, but from reallocation. The plant is dismantling itself to fund seed production, and research confirms this is a calculated biological trade-off, not a failure. By the time you see the spike, the decision's already made. Take cuttings from side branches before that happens, because those cuttings root easily and haven't started their clock yet. The plant that looks dead in August from summer dormancy and the plant that's actually dying in spring are two completely different situations. Number 8, Semper Vivum, hens and chicks. Semper Vivum literally means always living, and the colony does live on indefinitely, but each individual rosette inside it is monocarpic. It flowers exactly once, sets seed, and dies. Most people who grow them never notice because the chicks around the hen fill the gap so fast. What the data shows is that the dying rosette doesn't go passively. It pulls carbon, nitrogen, and stored energy back from its own tissue and dumps everything into seed production, converting itself into offspring at roughly a 1-to-1 ratio by dry weight. Unlike agave or Puya raimondi, this cycle runs 2 to 4 years, so you can watch the whole monocarpic sequence play out in a single pot. Number 9, Lobelia teleki. Above 13,000 feet on Mount Kenya, Lobelia teleki spends years as a ground-level rosette before sending up a single flower spike that can reach 6 feet tall. Then it dies. One shot at altitude, in air thin enough to make the whole investment feel reckless. The nights up there drop below freezing year-round, so the plant produces dissolved compounds in its central water cup that lower the freezing point and keep the tissue alive through nightly freeze-thaw cycles that would kill most plants outright. But stored energy and antifreeze chemistry aren't enough on their own. The bloom has to land when sunbirds are active at that elevation, because they're the pollinators. Miss that window and the whole multi-year accumulation produces nothing. Number 10, Furcrea false agave. Furcrea looks exactly like an agave. Same rosette, same spiky leaves, same long wait before anything happens. But when it finally blooms, it does something agave doesn't. It grows small plantlets, called bulbils, directly on the flower spike. When the stalk collapses after the parent dies, those bulbils scatter across the ground, already carrying their own stored reserves, ready to root without waiting for ideal germination conditions. So the plant runs 2 tracks at once: seeds from pollination for genetic diversity and bulbils for guaranteed clonal survival. From a practical standpoint, you can collect bulbils from the stalk before they even hit the ground and pot them straight up. The parent's death produces a ready-made nursery. Every plant on this list ran the same calculation and landed on the same answer. One massive reproductive event beats a lifetime of smaller ones. The agave, the bamboo, the lobelia freezing on a volcanic slope at 13,000 feet, They all arrived at that same conclusion through completely separate evolutionary paths, which tells you how strong that pressure really is. Botanists call this strategy simulparity, and it's not a flaw or a quirk. It's a tested solution to a hard problem. Next time you see a plant that's flowered and collapsed, don't read it as failure. The seeds are already out there. Subscribe for more plant biology that works nothing like you'd expect.